Yeah, sure.
Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, June 4th, 2024 regular business meeting of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum with council members Madrone and Cooper excused this evening. And with that, I need a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We have an agenda. So our first item this evening is item 2A, which is special recognition, which is a proclamation recognizing Capital City Pride and the LGBTQIA plus Pride Month. And we will begin with a shared reading, beginning with Councilmember Parsley.
Whereas the month of June was designated Pride Month to commemorate the Stonewall riots which occurred in June 1969 and are generally recognized as the catalyst of LGBTQIA civil rights movement, and whereas across the country there has been an alarming increase in the introduction of anti-LGBTQIA plus bills specifically targeting transgender people and women, limiting their bodily autonomy and the right to access necessary medical care, and
whereas it is now even more essential that local and state governments reaffirm their commitment to supporting LGBTQIA plus communities, and whereas our Governor Jay Inslee signed Senate Bill 5462 in March, which will mandate schools to learn about the contributions of underrepresented groups in school, including those in the LGBTQIA plus community, and
whereas the City of Olympia welcomes and celebrates the diversity of sexualities, genders, and families of all residents and visitors, and whereas the City of Olympia commits to making our community a safer and thriving place for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and non-binary, queer, questioning, asexual, intersex, two-spirit, pansexual, gender fluid, and all under the rainbow umbrella. And
whereas in 1991, Capital City Pride organized the first Washington small town pride located outside of the relative safety of the big city of Seattle, whereas the City of Olympia has been honored to serve as the host city for the first Olympia Pride, later renamed Capital City Pride, and every Pride since, and whereas the City of Olympia is honored to celebrate the LGBTQIA plus community and again participate in the Capital City Pride Festival themed All Bodies Are Pride to be held the weekend of June 29th, 2024 at the Port Plaza in Parsifal Landing. And
Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Olympia City Council does hereby proclaim June 2024 as LGBTQIA plus Pride Month and June 29th and 30th as Capital City Pride Weekend in the City of Olympia, and reaffirms the city's commitment to supporting and standing with the LGBTQIA plus communities. Signed in the City of Olympia, Washington, this 4th day of June 2024, Olympia City Council, Dante Payne, Mayor. And at this time, I'd like to invite up Natalie Koblenz, who is the president and creative event producer of Capital City Pride, along with her sister, Eva Koblenz, to say a few words.
All right, thank you so much, Council. We really appreciate it. And on behalf of Capital City Pride and the LGBTQIA2+ community, we're so grateful to be here. This proclamation means so much. And I wanted to let you all know a little bit about Capital City Pride and what we're doing this last weekend of June. And I'm not sure if any of you all got our postcard. We sent it out in the mail. I just want to read it out loud so that you know kind of what we did last year and where we're going. It'll be quick. So, did you know in 2023, Pride set a stage for over 500 LGBTQIA2+ artists, musicians, small businesses, and activists, produced 6 events, 2 family-friendly events, 2 daytime events, 1 pub crawl, 1 workshop, and assisted with 2 LGBTQIA2+ marches and 1 annual Pride Festival. This year, in 2024, we've been doing so much more, building bridges, collaborating and connecting with our community, and growing not only our roots, but our rainbows. And so we're really excited to be here. This month, we have over 4 different fun events happening, which June 22nd is the Pride Pub Crawl for downtown to be able to have economic growth down there and acceptance of the queer community in all of the establishments. And then on June 28th, we have a Pride Block Party where we'll be dancing in the streets down on Water Street. And on the 29th, we have the Daytime Festival, and we have over 20 artists that will be able to uplift and elevate themselves on stage. And then we have an after party at the Capitol Theater, followed by the next day on Sunday, we have a Pride Parade. And then we also have a Dyke Day in the Park at Heritage Park. So we have over 7 stages this year, whereas 4 years ago, we started out with only 200 people and lamplighters. So we have over, I think it's going to be 5,000 tourists coming in, estimated, to this community to help grow the love and appreciation and acceptance and accommodations of the queer community. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Any questions from council? Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Hey, Natalie, this is for you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being at our crosswalk unveiling over the weekend, and just overall your longtime commitment to this group, and making sure that you and team really put on a pride celebration that we can really be proud of in our city. You know, I frequently hear about, they'll say Seattle Pride, oh, and Olympia has a great one too, you know, all the time. I had a couple of questions that I'm hoping to hear from you. I think this is a great space for not only celebrating the proclamation, but also some learning moments as well for our community or whoever's tuning in.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions. The first one is, I think it was last year, you all were embracing an alcohol-free Pride. And so can you talk about that and what that looked like, and was there success in that? And is that going to be rolled over a little bit this year?
Oh yeah, definitely. We as a collective in this community of Olympia, I've learned by having group meetings and connecting with individuals that the majority of the queer community that I know wants to elevate themselves and connect with themselves inside. And so we're all learning and growing together. And we realize that alcohol and other extracurricular stuff is not very beneficial to our mental health. And so right now we're all on this uplift of elevating ourselves, both all spiritually and physically. And so we are a dry festival. We're one of the only LGBTQ Pride dry festivals in the area, and we take great pride in that. And it's going to probably most likely stay that way. We do have a pub crawl on the 22nd, which is geared towards alcohol, but the day festival is specifically dry, and we are going to keep it that way. And people are so excited and happy that when they come in, they can feel relaxed. And when I do talk to other people from outside, like from Seattle or Tacoma, they, there's a lot of things that could happen and arise when alcohol is introduced into a space. Mm-hmm. And so the reason people come here to come to this Pride is because it is dry, and they don't, especially people, queer couples with families or just families in general, want to be around a celebratory space where people are heightened in the community with love and drunk off of like amor instead of drunk off of beer.
Oh, that's lovely. I got 2 more. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a teetotaler myself. I don't think that makes me better than anyone, but it definitely makes me feel like, hey, maybe that'll really be fun and not, people falling over all over the place or the stereotypes of when there is alcohol involved. And so I really like that. I think it's just more inclusive overall. So I have a couple other questions for you. So Dyke Day in the Park.
Yeah.
Now, if that was not on a postcard, no way I would say that on the news. No way.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. I understand that marginalized communities, I don't want to say this is what you're doing, though marginalized communities will sometimes take back a word. Sometimes in my day job, I'm fortunate to do equity at the Department of Corrections, and things will come up that are not necessarily always workplace appropriate, but things will come up like, hey, how come that rap music says the N-word in it? How come women are sitting around calling themselves a B word or something like that? And there is this idea that folks, when they've had a term used against them in a derogatory way, there's this idea of like taking it back and kind of taking back power. So I don't know if that's sort of the idea here, but if you could just talk a little bit about that. Because when I saw it on the postcard, I was a little like, that's a choice. So tell me about that choice. I'd like to learn.
Yeah, of course. So in the queer community, or with the lesbians, I can say, as someone who came out, I was 15 when I realized that I am gay. And, words matter. And so am I gay? Am I queer? Am I a dyke? Am I a lesbian? Am I non-binary? If I'm non-binary, does that mean I can't be a dyke? You know what I mean? So there's like all these things that go on. And the word dyke for me, because I came from the Bay Area, it's commonly used as like, what up, dyke? How's it going? It's not a negative connotation at all. And in LA and I don't know if they have one in Seattle, but a lot of other major cities, they do have Dyke Day in the Park. And it's not an uncommon thing. And so it's more so a collection of women that get together, and to ensure that it's mostly women, they'll use the phrase and the term dyke to make sure that they know, hey, this is where the ladies are at. And so that's essentially the push and pull for it, and it's a really great celebration. The one that happens in LA, I think it's been happening for over 15 years, and it's a really calm type of time. There's just a DJ that pops up, a DJ or two. People bring their blankets, they bring a little picnic basket and their kids, and they just hang out and chill and listen to music. So using the word is originally, yes, taking back and using it powerful for us. But it also isn't a negative connotation anymore today in 2024.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. And I also understand that you can't speak for everyone, right? You can't
Correct.
speak for all women that identify as LGBTQIA+. But I certainly appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah.
I think we're reminded again that context is everything.
Yeah.
I got another one for you. Oh, do you have something else?
Yeah, and I do want to let you know that there is a group of DJs here in Olympia, and they do Dyke Night at the Crypt. And that's been going on for like years, and it's really great. They're a really great crew. And so I've been trying to push them to do more things in the day and in the parks instead of in the bars and in the dark. And so this is a switch for them to be able to see and experience the happiness and the joy that could be at a dry space in the sun in the park.
Thank you. That's another community opportunity, and I'm sure that group really appreciates the plug.
Yeah.
So I just have one last question, and then I'm sure my council mates probably want to make some comments as well and ask questions. I am interested in both definitely my City of Olympia kind of hat, and also, as mentioned, I do work at the Department of Corrections. So I'm interested in when we have community events, it's not uncommon for law enforcement to be there, no matter what the event is. And so there has been some tension with that in the past. So could you talk to me about where the Pride Committee is, the Olympia Pride Committee is, with having law enforcement present? And then, if you have any specifics about like how they show up, that kind of thing. But I'd be really curious.
Yeah, so the board and the council that I connect with, it's a group of about 7 or 8 people, and it's a diverse variety of folks. And so we all feel, what we've heard from the community is that sometimes seeing officer in full, what do you call it, brigade? What's the term?
In uniform?
In uniform. Okay, so in full uniform might be traumatizing to some communities, and they don't want to see that. And so it's really the uniform that is kind of like a red flag. It's not the people, it's the uniform. To my understanding, I can't speak for everyone. But so what we have done is we have connected with OPD, and just like last year, we have asked, we really appreciate your support. We have our own security crew. If we need any assistance, will you be there for us? Also, we think that we can handle this festival on our own. So we have a good rapport, I feel, with OPD, and we connect with them and we let them know. We have I have their phone number in my phone. I can text them at any time, and they're really good at responding. And so right now, what the idea is that we can govern ourselves during this time as to not send shock value to the community that comes from around to the festival, and so we can take care of ourselves. But if we do need help for any violence, or if there's any cars that want to drive through the parade, or if there's any people that, knock on wood, have guns or things as such, then we will definitely be on alert and call and say, hey, this is happening over on this street, and this is what they're wearing, and we'll give them a full description, and they'll take care of it for us. But as it is, the way that the community feels is that it's best to celebrate without the uniforms there. If people want to come and not be in uniform, everyone's always more than welcome to be there. That's my understanding. And we do have constant conversations about surrounding OPD all the time. And it is Waverly, some people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. And then a lot of people are like, oh, no, we don't want them there. So it's a struggle internally. And it would be nice to build these bridges and make more connections. We all have our own histories and pasts that might include being connecting with officers in different ways. So we all have our own experiences that we go off of.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's such a balance, right?
Yeah.
And we also have first responders, law enforcement that are a part of the LGBTQIA community. And honestly, of all of our community members, law enforcement or not, I think we'd be really hard pressed to find someone that wasn't connected to the LGBTQ plus community in some way, right? Be it self-identifying or their loved ones. And so making sure that we strike a good balance and let them know that, hey, come and attend as yourself, right? And that means a lot of things. So anyways, appreciate the time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for those questions. Mayor Pro Tem's wonderful example of demonstrating how it's okay to ask questions about someone else's identity that you may not be okay with. So I appreciate you doing that. And we had that same conversation about OPD, but I'll save my comments for later. Councilmember Parsley.
Mayor Pro Tem and Natalie, thank you. That was a great exchange. I appreciate it. I just wanted to congratulate you. Coming out of the pandemic, this was one of the celebrations I was dearly hoping we would get back, because I think you said celebration and joy.
Yes.
Happiness. I looked forward to the Pride celebration every year in Olympia just because it is happiness and love. And to lose that would have been a crime. So thank you for putting up with lamplighters and expanding and growing. You're a change maker, and I appreciate that. Okay?
Thank you.
And I will be there because it is fun, it's joyful, and it's happy.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I think that says it quite well. And whenever I see you, you always are just hard at work and in good spirits and always smiling. And I so appreciate your work, your effort, your labor that goes into putting something like this on. It was really nice to see you and see a few of our community members on June 1st to dedicate the Rainbow Crosswalk that we now have in addition to our trans community crosswalk. The new Rainbow Crosswalk is now at the intersection of Legion Way and Columbia Street. And it's such a symbolic place and location for that. So I just really want to stress the importance of recognizing that while this might seem routine for us to do these things every year, and we know we live in a community that embraces the LGBTQIA plus community, we cannot take for granted where we live in comparison to other places in this country that certainly do not embrace us, and in fact do the exact opposite. And I think it's pride just becomes more and more relevant every year as we see this. And so that's why it's important to observe this on an annual basis. And, we say things like, oh, the alphabet mafia, and we make these jokes about the LGBTQIA plus community because that's what it means to grow and become more inclusive. The more we educate ourselves, we become more aware of other people's life's experiences and we bring them in. And that's something that is certainly worthy of celebration. The one thing I want to say is your question about OPD and law enforcement. I did have that same question, and we had a private conversation about that. Personally, I think it's worth noting that there was a time where police officers raided gay bars. And now we live in a time where we see police decorated rainbow emblems on the side of police cars. We see them in uniform marching in certain communities' parades. And for me, that is certainly a symbol of how far we have come. Sure, certainly we're not perfect. Certainly there are people who have their own personal experiences with law enforcement. But for me, it is a symbol of that progress. And so I hope we can continue to keep that dialogue open with our police department and certainly appreciate them. And lastly, I want to mention that for any of the haters out there, don't get any crazy ideas because the Olympia Police Department is certainly present, even though there is no uniform presence. So with that, I'd like to invite you up for a photo, and council members, please bring your flags. All right. Oh. Okay, so thank you very much again, and I just want to acknowledge our park staff as well and say thank you to Olivia Salazar-Debro and Rachel Maris for all your work as well to make this happen, so thank you very much. So with that, we will move on to public comment. We do, I believe, have 2 people signed in this evening in person. Before we begin, I do just want to remind you that there is a clock to my right, to your left, that indicates your time for your comments. You have 2 minutes. You have your green, yellow, and red lights. The green light indicating that your time has begun, the yellow light indicating that you have about 30 seconds remaining in your comments, and the red light indicating that your time has expired. If you do not finish your comments, feel free to email them to the council. I do want to mention that we are in a campaign season, so please refrain from declaring your candidacy or mentioning your candidacy for office in your comments this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to the Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, so we have 2 for public comment tonight, and then no one signed up virtually. That's right. So just 2. So we have Zainab Najati, and very adorable human who I think is outwardly expressing how many of us feel during meetings. They are also welcome to come up.
Yeah, sorry for the disruption.
No worries.
Hi, council members. I'm Zainab. I just have like 2 small requests. One, I was wondering if you could maybe put bike parking in front of Left Bank Pastry. I know that the city has a program, but it's mostly just, it's limited to the downtown core as far as putting in bike parking. But that is a place where the business clearly can't fit bike parking there. And also just a lot of people, it's near a park, it's near communities where people would actually bike there if there was sufficient bike parking. I like to bike there. There's 1 pole you can hook up to. There's competition for it sometimes. And then just in general, I was hoping you could relook at the whole policy about where the city is willing to put bike parking. Because I'm just thinking the city provides street parking in a lot of places. And there are businesses on the west side, there's kind of these little hubs now next to Deuce Donuts and Hash where there's no bike parking. And there is, maybe some street space that could be used to put a bike rack, 4 bollards to protect the bikes, maybe cost $2 to $4 grand. And would, I think, do a lot for, making things more accessible for people who bike. So yeah, that was it. Thank you. And she was quiet during that, so it worked out.
Thank you. After public comment, there will be an opportunity for council to respond. And so next we have Susan Bottarelli. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, thank you for being here. And then I'll back to the mayor.
Okay, and we don't have anybody signed up online, is that correct? Just want to confirm that. Okay, all right, thank you. So that concludes public comment for this evening, so we will move on to adoption of the consent calendar. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, comments from council.
She's left the room, but, I really, I was going to say, we are going to be looking at our engineering and design standards, which is for new development. I want to consider the fact that, a combination of new development, redevelopment, and our own funds to see where we can put the bicycle parking. I also noticed that sometimes development will just put parking around the corner some weird place because they're just checking a box and they're not putting it in a place that meets those needs. So it's heard.
Thank you for that. That was important not to skip over that and gloss over it. Yes, Councilmember Parsley.
I would go so far as to say that we should have some of our bike stands also have electricity to them. As the e-bikes go,
Yeah.
plugging them in while you are in doing shopping is a good idea.
Councilmember Gilman.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. I just wanted to call out that it's true that we can work on those standards and parking on new development, that there's always room for improvement there, but there's something else that she said that I wanted to call out. She said, we provide car parking as a city, lots and lots, thousands of parking stalls. And so she wasn't so much criticizing how the racks are on private development as asking if there might be more municipal bike parking along the streets or the sidewalks. So I just wanted to call that out because we haven't had a lot of conversation about upping the amount of city-provided bicycle parking.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
Great idea. I also think that something that is a kind of a future thing to think about is long-term storage for bicycle parking. A lot of people will not ride a bike downtown or in certain areas because they feel like it will get stolen. And so trying to get it in a way that it feels like, you can come in and then there's some sort of storage that's public, not just private, would make a big difference, I think.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Also, we hear from our public commenter that the first part of what they're saying, they're very specifically talking about in front of one of our local bakeries, right? And so I'm not suggesting that we go do that tomorrow. Although, how can we be, if we can, more responsive in the short term as we're thinking about these long-term solutions? And so if there's a list, can we put that as one to prioritize looking at? And I wonder if there's something that we can do in the short term. And then we'll wait for you to be called by the mayor, but I see City Manager Bernie might have something.
City Manager Bernie.
Why, thank you. I was just going to say that I'm sure Mark Russell's taken a note down there as he's giving me the head nod, and so we'll look at that one. And then I made a note to myself just to have more conversation with Mark and Sophie, just so I can get more familiar with kind of the decision making around development review and all of that, and how those things happen. So we'll have some follow up for you.
Thank you. So, and now with that, I need a motion to adopt this evening's consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of the consent calendar signify by saying aye. Yes. Questions, comments, polls?
Yes, yes, that's what I was hoping for.
Yes.
I do.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to ask a question about item 4D on the anti-icing salt.
Ah, okay. Yes.
May I go ahead?
Yes, please do.
Please. Could I ask, for years we bragged about having our beet sugar alternative to salt. And I don't know if for a long time we've been back to salt brine, or if there's a different kind of salt that's less corrosive on cars. Or I just be curious to get a little salting the road update.
In January. Hey, Mark.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. For the record, I'm Mark Russell, Public Works Director. To answer your question, Councilmember Gilman, we have always gotten our anti-icing material from Thurston County. They used to put molasses in the solution to help it stick to the roadway, for lack of a better description. They no longer do that. It is just salt and liquid mixture. And so that is what we have available in the area in order to do our anti-icing when the weather is bad.
So is that the state of the art? I mean, have other cities moved away from salt because of the corrosion on car underbodies, or is it because we're less frequent than the Northeast, so we don't have as much of an impact on the vehicles?
Yeah, I can't say that it is the most state-of-the-art. It's what we have available to us. We could certainly look into, are there other materials, but that's a very good point. We have such few snow and ice events and such short-lived, 9 times out of 10 that it is what we have available to do. But we could look in to see what other technologies we've been talking about. Should we invest in our own brine making facility here instead of having to rely on someone else? There was a few years ago where the county system went down and then we couldn't get brine, and so we had to come up with some other ways to treat our streets during a snow event. And so as we look into, should we do something that's more Olympia centric, we could certainly look into other types of materials.
Thank you for the update. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Any other additional questions, comments, or pulls on the consent calendar? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the consent calendar signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Consent calendar is adopted. So moving on to agenda item 5A, which is a public hearing on the Community Development Block Grant Program for the year 2024. Draft annual action plan. And here to present this evening is Anastasia Everett, the CDBG program manager with our Office of Community Vitality.
Hi. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. For the record, my name is Anastasia Everett, and I am the city's Community Development Block Grant Manager. I am here this evening to share with you a brief overview of the program and to present for the public hearing on the upcoming program year's activities. The city receives an annual allocation of CDBG funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, as an entitlement community. CDBG is a flexible grant that can be used for a variety of activities tailored to the community's needs. Examples of eligible activities are listed here, as well as the national objectives. Activities can be carried out by the grantee or through subrecipients. Subrecipients are eligible nonprofit organizations. Each eligible activity must also meet a national objective. The primary objectives are a benefit to low and moderate income persons, slum and blight removal, and urgent need. I am presenting this evening as a part of our public participation plan. Every spring, staff prepare an annual action plan with proposed activities and goals. The public hearing tonight is for the upcoming program year 2024, beginning September 1st and running through August 31st, 2025. And now we will move to the proposed projects and activities for program year 24. The available funding for program year 24 is $367,643. Our entitlement dropped this year about $15,000 to $347,000. And we do have $20,000 in unspent prior year funds from projects that came in under budget that we are able to allocate to new projects. The following are proposed projects for program year 24. We issued an RFP in March and received requests upwards of $750,000. Staff worked with the scoring team to select the following projects that we are recommending to the council for funding. Rebuilding Together Thurston County provides critical home repair to low-income homeowners regionally. The city's CDBG award is used only on homeowners within the city of Olympia. Examples of critical home repair performed by Rebuilding Together include re-roofing, emergency plumbing repairs, health and safety improvements, and ADA accessibility improvements to the home. And proposed funding for 2024 is $75,000. South Puget Sound Habitat for Humanity's critical home repair program is also region-wide, and examples of improvements include the construction of steps, porch, or wheelchair ramps, window repair or replacements, siding and trim repair, and accessibility improvements. Funds here will also only be used for homeowners within the city of Olympia. South Puget Sound Habitat for Humanity is, I'm going to back that up. Sorry, South Puget Sound Habitat for Humanities is also I wrote the wrong thing down on my paper. I'm so sorry, I'm just reading from it. They're a subrecipient for the Energize Olympia program, and they were last year as well. This year, the proposed award is $46,273, and it will provide fully subsidized heat pump installations for low-income homeowners in the city. An award of $51,961 is proposed to the subrecipient Enterprise for Equity for economic development projects. Enterprise for Equity will meet the low moderate income limited clientele national objective and provide technical assistance and business training to low-income business owners within the city of Olympia. Staff recommend funding the homeless response team for an additional outreach position with our public service funding. And planning and administrative costs are included in the proposed budget and capped at 20% of the annual allocation. The cost supports city staff to administer a compliant program. We also have a revolving loan fund update, and at this time it's going very well. We have 1 project currently in construction and 4 in the pipeline for the upcoming program year or 2. Staff recommend to include contingency projects in our annual action plan. The inclusion of contingency projects will allow staff flexibility in planning during the annual action plan process. And the contingency projects that staff recommend are Rebuilding Together Thurston County and Habitat for Humanity, just a split there. We're currently in our public comment period, and this evening is the public hearing, and City Council consideration of approval is June 18th. And I am available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia. Any questions or comments from council? Councilmember Gilman.
I just wanted to bring in the Community Livability and Public Safety Committee meeting, we had a conversation about, right now the project selection is a list created by staff that's reviewed by council. And I just wanted to say we had some conversation about other ways we might approach that, and I think that this is a good path to have the annual recommendations come from staff, have them do the review, and have us have an opportunity to consider them. And then, is it every 5 years that we do the strategic plan piece of this?
Yeah, so every 5 years we have the consolidated plan, which then informs the priorities for every annual action plan.
So that's our opportunity to set sort of policy direction and priorities. And I think that, I think that makes sense, that at the 5-year visit, council spends more time on it, but annually we're just sort of watching and allowing staff to make recommendations. So I wanted to put that out.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Gilman. And I believe in committee, I had also mentioned about the opportunities for new partnerships. And so certainly I see that as part of that effort as well. Any additional questions or comments? All right, so at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing on the Community Development Block Grant Year 2024 Draft Annual Action Plan. So I don't believe we have anyone signed up to speak for the public hearing this evening, but it is our standard practice to open it up to those who are present in the chambers who wish to speak on this issue in the hearing. So is there anyone who would like to speak to the draft action plan at this time in council chambers? Seeing none. Going once. Going twice. Okay, so that concludes any business for the public hearing on the draft action plan. I do want to mention that there is the period for this will be open through June 17th if anyone wishes to email any comments to the council. And at that time, the City Council will consider approval of the Program Years 2024 Annual Action Plan at our regular business meeting on Tuesday, June 18th. At this time, I'm going to close the public hearing on the Community Development Block Grants Year 2024 Draft Annual Action Plan. So that takes us to our only business item of the evening, which is item 6A, which is the approval of a resolution authorizing the funding recommendations of the Cultural Access Advisory Board for Inspire Olympia. And here to present this evening is Mary Grace Gaddu, Inspire Olympia Program Manager in our Community Planning and Development Department. Take your time.
We get stuck.
There you go. Thank you, Kelly. Mary Grace.
A little more adjusting. Anastasia's tall. Good evening, Mayor Payne and members of the City Council. For the record, I'm Mary Grace Gaddu, and I am the Inspire Olympia Program Manager. And it's a privilege to bring to you tonight the first applicant cohort for Inspire Olympia, talk a little bit about this application group, and offer you the funding recommendation from our Cultural Access Advisory Board. Inspire Olympia is our city's cultural access program approved by voters in 2022. It dedicates 0.1% of our sales tax to a fund, the Cultural Access Fund, which is to be reinvested in local nonprofit cultural organizations who are mission-focused in arts, science, culture, and heritage, and who do public programming for Olympia residents. The fund is projected to earn about $3 million a year. And the purpose of tonight's presentation, as I said, is to share the outcome of our first application cycle, a fantastic cohort of 60 local nonprofits who are going to increase access to cultural programs and experiences all across Olympia and enliven our community in 1,000 ways. And it's also, of course, to request your approval of a resolution to fund their work as recommended by the Cultural Access Advisory Board and supported by the Council's Committee on Community Livability and Public Safety. Unanimously supported, I should add. So with that, I will begin with our commitment to Olympia voters for use of this funding, which was spelled out in the ballot initiative that voters approved in 2022. The initiative committed that a minimum of 80% of all revenues will be dedicated to cultural programs in Olympia, that up to 10% of all revenues will be dedicated to providing children enrolled in Olympia Public Schools transportation to cultural programs that are funded by Inspire Olympia, and 10% can be used for administrative costs. A Cultural Access Advisory Board was appointed to help us to meet this commitment. Board member Melissa Mead is here this evening to help with the presentation and share how the board reached its funding recommendation. And then a couple of our board members had planned to listen in, so hopefully they're here remotely. And I know we have at least 2 in the room as well, and one of our review committee members too. So thank you for being here tonight. Team 3. We have 3 board members? Yeah, we have 3 board members in the room. Inspire Olympia Program Specialist Amelia Layton is my colleague in the program work. She's also here. She led the application and review and evaluation process, and she's just done a great job. She's here to help with the question and answer later if needed. So I'm going to start with a brief refresher on the program framework, the application process, and some information about our applicants and what they're going to do in the community. First, a timeline. Following a public outreach effort that ran through the winter of 2023, Inspire Olympia opened applications in mid-January, and local organizations went to work to apply. That application window ran January 15th through March 15th, and we provided information sessions, workshops, and one-on-one application support. The applications closed in mid-March, and that's when our review panels went to work. The evaluation and review process featured the Cultural Access Advisory Board members and members of the public, and they developed a funding recommendation that is largely before you tonight. We brought the Advisory Board's funding recommendation to the CLIPS Committee, as I said, in May, and they roundly, unanimously endorsed that recommendation for your approval tonight. Just a note, too, following tonight's council consideration, contracts can be active as soon as July 1st, and then quarterly reporting and billing cycle begins from there. In 2023, the Advisory Board developed an implementation plan for Inspire, which was approved by City Council in August. And it includes eligibility parameters for organizations wishing to apply, a program granting framework, program funding goals, which are here in orange, and guidelines for applicants that included evaluation criteria, and those are here as well in blue on the right-hand side of this slide. The evaluation criteria were used to score each proposal, and these are really just categories, what's listed here. Each of these is an area under which there were criteria that took the form essentially of prompts for applicants to read and respond to. So there were multiple criteria under each of these topics, and these were detailed in the application guidelines and discussed in our workshops. The guidelines with the full list of criteria in each of these categories is attached to tonight's staff report and available on our webpage. So for example, with programming merit and value as an evaluation area, applicants were asked to show how their organization's mission, program, and values align with these funding goals as just sort of the baseline. So at a minimum, there were minimum expectations. At a minimum, applicants should demonstrate, was the language of the guidelines, and then demonstrate their compliance were the degree to which they address these funding goals. And then there was also a list for each of higher expectations. The most successful applicants will address some or all of the following. So with program merit and value, for instance, we asked them to additionally respond to how and why the organization's programming is relevant and meaningful for the intended participants and audience, how the programming deepens, broadens, and diversifies cultural programs and services in Olympia, how the program benefits or supports Olympia residents and communities, and how it sustains existing programs and expands or improves them. So that same level of sort of descriptive prompting and criteria was applied for all of these categories. Those who offered youth programming were asked to describe how they provide active learning experiences and if and how they're connected with broader youth development goals. Under community engagement and impact, we wanted to know who they serve, how do they engage the public, and are they pursuing meaningful collaboration and partnerships? So there was a lot of content under each of these areas. For equity and access, we asked if they offer specific and achievable plans, like strategies for enhancing public access, and specifically how they're working toward equitable, inclusive, and welcoming cultural programming. And then the last two categories relate to sort of the program's operations and management. For smaller organizations, smaller and newer organizations, we looked at capacity and feasibility. We wanted to know if they had thorough and reasonable plans that are achievable with the resources and the leadership that they have. With our larger and more sophisticated organizations, we looked closer. We looked for a track record of successful implementation. We asked about financial responsibility, evaluation practices, staffing, and whether the staff and board are representative of those that they serve. So applicants who thoroughly addressed the criteria following these prompts and showed alignment with these funding goals scored higher. As a reminder, we established a funding structure with two options or pathways for seeking funding, each slightly different in terms of eligibility requirements, funding levels, and contract duration. The system was intended to even the playing field among a really diverse field of applicants, and it allowed us to improve participation and outcomes because smaller and newer organizations with less experience are not directly competing with larger, better resourced, experienced groups, say with grant writers on staff, for instance. Applicant organizations chose one pathway in which to apply. The comprehensive funding pathway is a 2-year contract. Organizations could apply for up to 15% of their operating budget, but there's a maximum amount of $75,000 a year. And those organizations have to offer year-round programming, thus the term comprehensive. The impact funding is the other category. It's a 1-year contract. It's designed for smaller and newer organizations. They don't have to do year-round programming. They can do as little as one event per year. They do not have to have a track record, and their programs, as I said, are evaluated on capacity and feasibility. We also allowed in this group organizations who are not registered nonprofits to apply if they could be sponsored by an existing registered nonprofit. It's called fiscal sponsorship, and we had a number of those. And just to note that because the comprehensive funding is a 2-year contract, we're basically going to be running on a biennial cycle for that group. So every other year, in even years, we'll accept comprehensive applications, but the impact cycle will be every year. Okay. Any questions before I? Okay, great. So who applied? How did our community respond? We received 61 applications, 40 in the impact pathway, and 17 of those were with fiscal sponsors. I'm happy to say, too, that a lot of those fiscal sponsors were local nonprofits, which was an exciting surprise for me. It means that the whole community is kind of working together. There were 21 applicants in the comprehensive group. Those are our larger organizations. 6 cultural organizations are serving and representing marginalized groups. 39 offer youth programming, which is another great surprise. Happy to see that many. And 10 are already offering field trips. You can see from the chart that the tall bars on the left, it might be hard to read, the tall bars on the left are our arts organizations. Obviously, they outstrip in numbers arts, rather heritage or science or cultural organizations. Also expected. We hope to see some adjustment in that in future years. We'd like to see the science and culture and heritage field strengthen a little bit and grow. So I guess the other thing to note here is the ratio roughly between impact and comprehensive is shown in the pie chart there. Now the fun part. Thank you for putting up with all that information. The fun part. How's the funding going to be used? As I said, there were 61 applicants, and what I did is I went through and I pulled kind of a good sound bite from each application. I won't read them all, but I'll read a selection for those perhaps who can't see the screen. And I'm just going to run through them. How will the funding be used? It'll be used for field trips during spring and fall conference weeks, for bicycle education, internships with local farmers, free choral concerts, free outdoor all-ages public daytime dance party, the procession of the species, and the luminary parade. Art in the park, an all-Latine cabaret meets talk show style burlesque review and cultural celebrations. To produce a film involving 10 to 15 Indigenous young adults. To hire a facilitator, a beginning beekeeping class, to hire qualified staff, to offer a stipend for mentorship, to put on a festival of the Stechas, for presentations that explore the history of Olympia music, for more free choral concerts, for summertime and after-school theater programs, an all-ages puppet show and a puppetry-based school program for K through 5, free dance classes at a local Title I elementary school for all 320 students, to hire an executive director, for administrative labor, rent, and material costs, to ensure the long-term stability of our impact on the community, to create and implement a native storytelling project, to host a conference on music and healing in the African American community, a family-oriented concert featuring an introduction to orchestral instruments with a petting zoo, to provide in-class visits to 900 Olympia School District kids by symphony musicians, after-school classes and break camps, and free passes for OSD participants so they can return with their families. Board and staff training in diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. Whew. Discounts to low-income participants, free days and free events, Spanish translations, supplies for neurodivergent students, professional development workshop for elementary school music educators, to increase accessibility for neurodivergent and disabled community members, field trips for all OSD kindergartners. Just a quick list, and there's so much more. So this should stir some excitement, and I hope it was just a little bit overwhelming because it was for us, and I wanted to give you a taste of that in a good way. And I also hope you appreciate the positive impact on our cultural organizations that'll come with stabilization, helping them to grow their capacity through training and hiring and planning. And then I also thought it could give you a little bit of an insight into the enormous task of our review panels, who had to read all these applications and all of these proposals to carefully to evaluate them. And that is my segue to introduce Melissa Mead from our advisory board to talk about that review process.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. For the record, Melissa Mead, Cultural Access Advisory Board member, and my day job is Dean of Arts Arts and Humanities at South Puget Sound Community College. And it's just been an honor to serve on this committee last year. And it's an honor to represent the committee, and a delight, I should say. So I'm here to walk you through how the panel process worked and how the funding recommendation worked, some of the details. So we had 2 panels, one for each funding pathway. Four board members served on each panel, along with 2 community members. Each panelist spent, we estimated about 45 hours to review over 6 weeks' time. We identified conflicts of interest among all of us. You know, there were several, and we recused ourselves from discussions of those conflicts. Every reviewer then read and scored each application individually, and this was in the submittable app. Then we came together and discussed each as a panel, so we went through each application. Each panel had about 4 to 5 meetings. We got to know each other very well. Scores were finalized at the last panel meeting, and we discussed funding levels based on overall scoring profile of the cohort. Each panelist provided notes. We were required to provide notes in the submittable app, and so our applicants have access to pretty extensive feedback. And I will say too that as we reviewed the applications, it had this cumulative effect of wanting to give everybody more feedback, wanting to put people in touch with each other and just build this, wonderful community the vision of the wonderful community kind of came together as we were scoring and talking about them. And so at this time, I'd like to publicly thank our citizen representatives. We had Sergio Garcia, Stacy Waterman, Lee Little, formerly with the Inspire Olympia Ad Hoc Committee, Stacy Hicks of the Heritage Commission, and Kathy Dorgan of the Arts Commission. And so our funding recommendation, the full advisory met in May. And after we aligned the guidance from both panels. So we took each set of recommendations, pulled them together, and we reached this funding formula that you're seeing on this slide, which I'll walk you through. So organizations that scored 60 or higher should receive 100% of their requested funding, and this represented 70% of all applications. Organizations that scored 40 to 59 should receive 75% of requested funding, and there are 13 organizations in this group, or 21%. And only one organization scored consistently low among the reviewers with a score below 40 and is not recommended for funding this year, with feedback coming to them. We had 3 applications associated with Avanti High School, and they're all newly formed organizations with fiscal sponsors, so these teachers went out of their work days to find fiscal sponsors and get the applications together on their own time. So we really honored that. And we decided that they should be funded, but we were concerned about how much funding was coming into one single high school that has a smaller population. And so we decided to fund them at 50%. That's about it, really. So on behalf of my advisory board members, I would like to thank the city staff, Mary Grace Gadu and Amelia Layton. They're amazing, so organized, and really impressive, and it's just been a delight. Thank you.
Well done, thank you. So how does that translate into our 60 applicants? And that is what you see here. These are our comprehensive organizations. As I said, there are 21 of them. In the column that has a white header, you see their 2-year total funding request. And in the pink on the right is their funding recommendation. It's only $100,000 difference between those 2 columns. And then this is the longer list of the smaller organizations who are recommended for impact funding. Again, the difference between the requested column and the granted column is just a little over $100,000. It's not a big change. Of course, that is a bigger change for the smaller organizations, but upon council approval, award letters will go out to each recipient, like tomorrow morning, and it'll include a summary of the panelists' notes and the group discussions, so they'll get immediate feedback. We have already begun to collect feedback on our process from the review panelists. We'll be seeking input from the cohort as well on how the whole application process went for them. We're planning cohort gatherings in June and July for orientation and some mixers and begin to really build that community actively. Once they complete and sign a contract, organizations can receive their first funding payment. So they'll get their first payment. They'll get up to five payments a year. Their first one upon signature of contract, and then quarterly after that. And they have to submit a progress report in order to get that payment. Any questions there before I jump to my last slide? Okay, thank you. So the Cultural Access Fund program budget looks like this. We have the tax collection started in January 2023. So we have 2023 funding minus our administrative costs for that year, plus the projected funding for 2024, and that will be $5.3 million total. And then we will, for this year, we're budgeting, based on this recommendation, $1.2 million for the comprehensive contracts, just under $1 million for the impact contracts. And then a couple other numbers here. We are required to have a cultural access program for the schools, and that consists of three components. Field trip fund to help pay for the cost of field trips. That is reimbursed to the organizations that host those field trips. A transportation reimbursement to Olympia School District to pay for the transportation costs to get kids to programs. And then we've added a third component proposed to hire an intermediary, a coordinator, to help coordinate and bring together our cultural community and our schools, whether that's principals or individual teachers, get them speaking the same language, because education has its own, right? And understanding each other's needs so that we can have successful school programming. So that's what that $430,000 is, and it's broken out to the right under that green header. That CAPS coordinator position, it's budgeted high as if it were going to be a city employee, just to put a number on paper. But our hope is to actually have that be a contracted service that is provided by a local nonprofit organization, so that we're actually using it to build capacity in a local nonprofit, which is kind of what this whole program's about. And then program administration, workshops and learning opportunities. We've budgeted $50,000 in this proposal to do some capacity building for our organizations, particularly, hopefully, to have some of the larger ones mentor the smaller ones. There's a lot to learn about grant writing, and we want to help folks not only for our program, but to leverage this so that they can seek other grants. And it's not just grant writing; it's training of all kinds. It's diversity training. It's how to market, how to build a better board, how to run volunteers, whatever they need. We're going to be listening and trying to respond. I think that's it. Do you have questions on the budget or any other aspect of the program in this recommendation?
Thank you so much, Mary Grace.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I do want to just acknowledge that 3 of the 5 of us heard this presentation already in the Community Livability and Public Safety Committee. So as you were presenting and asking if we had any questions along the way, that's probably why we didn't chime in. Councilmember Parsley.
It's a pretty simple one, but if I'm asking, I suspect others. You said that the comprehensive is every other year, but the impact is every year. So I'm assuming it's going to be the same schedule, January to March submission, and then March to now selection, is that correct?
I expect so,
Okay.
yes. We'll definitely want to keep that application window open that long. It's a good question whether we'd be able to shorten the review, but because the impact is the larger category, it's already a pretty big lift.
I just, one other thing I have to say, as you were reading that list, yeah, it was a little overwhelming, and I'm looking at our former mayor and thinking, wow, this exceeded what we all thought we would actually fund, and how much richer our community is going to be now.
Indeed. Any other questions or comments from council? Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
For folks that are not in the room, we're all sort of quietly smiling and bringing our attention over to former Mayor Selby, who is very largely smiling. Yeah, so, and looking forward to hearing from former Mayor Selby a little bit later, as we wouldn't be here without her. So I won't ask you the same questions that we asked in community livability and public safety. I know, darn, you're like, I just got, I'm ready for those.
Down.
Yeah. But I just want to lift up some things here. We've been, we're all, it's probably obvious, we're all very excited about this. As part of this city of Olympia, but then also as community members, right? So we've seen it before it got here. Community members had a chance to vote on whether they wanted this or not. They saw so many nonprofit and just kind of creatives alike come together, scientists, historians come together and say, hey, we really want this thing, especially during a time where people, are feeling the squeeze and to vote for something like this. I mean, that's really, really beautiful, and also really powerful. And saying like, here are our city's values, and this is what we want, right? And this is what we want to spend our money on. And then there was a lot of hard work with staff too. There was, and current and former council members. To get this to a place where it is doable and implementable. And then we have community members, that a couple of different groups of community members, some that are in the audience right now, that did the hard work of reviewing. I think, did you mention in your presentation just now how many hours of review it was?
Yeah, it was about 35 to 45 hours for each individual for that review work, yeah.
That's madness.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a
and
lot.
very
It's a lot to
thorough.
ask.
Yeah. And so that's not nothing, right? That's huge. And then so it was a lot to get here. And these are not just anyone that raises their hands to be a part of this process. These are vetted, wonderful community members that are very much experts in what they do. So anyway, the things that I would like to highlight about the presentation is that you really artfully and succinctly laid out what the criteria was, right, without getting too much into the weeds. But what the criteria was, and how are you going to score these candidates? How is the review committee going to tackle this? I think that if we could, we just give money to everyone and maybe not ask a lot of questions because we're excited about this. But you did it in just a really, really thoughtful way. And then, and I will also say, kind of on that note, is that after the materials were published online, and then we had that meeting on May 22nd with the council committee, myself and I'm sure probably other council colleagues started getting a couple of phone calls, started getting some emails saying, hey, we see that the writings on the wall, or at least on the website, that maybe our organization will get this much. What do you think about giving us more? Which I totally understand. If you're a development director for your organization or trying to get money for your organization, you're just going to try until the very last opportunity. So, no disrespect there. I totally get that. And also, I personally will be voting on this package as recommended by the community, or by the community board members, because I really want to respect and hold up how much thought and time was taken to come up with these recommendations, and I wouldn't want to sort of cherry pick my favorite organizations and just advocate to give them all funding, right? So back to those things that I was going to highlight in the presentation was it 61 people that applied?
61 organizations.
61 organizations. And of those 61 organizations, 60 organizations are receiving funding.
Yes.
And of those organizations, is it 72?
It's 72%, actually, if the finer numbers, yes. She said 72% will receive full funding.
72%. That's amazing.
Yeah, they did a great job.
Yeah.
And we heard from the community that it was a tough application. So we appreciate the work that they put into it. And if I may note, there was an article in the Olympian yesterday that published the recommended funding lists for any organizations who are out there who were looking for their name and didn't see it. It was because the list of impact organizations was intended to be scrolled on the online edition, and it didn't work. And so anybody whose organization started with a letter past M might have thought that they weren't on the list, and actually they just need to scroll. The Olympian corrected the technical difficulty, and it should be there today. So it's yesterday's article.
Oh, thank
FYI.
you. No, that's a great public service announcement. And also, those organizations will, get a little happy surprise. Maybe.
Yeah, I had a few panicked phone calls today.
And then also, so there are some organizations, we can be really excited that 60 out of 61 received funding and that 72% received full funding. And then that is obvious that there was one organization that didn't receive the funding this time around and some that didn't receive the full funding. So I really appreciate that that you're creating, like you said, a community where there is feedback for how people could enhance their application in the future. And I really appreciate the, are you calling it the orientation sessions in June and July?
Mm-hmm. We'll have orientation sessions. I can't say it either. Orientation sessions. One on Zoom in June, and then the one in July will be in person with a little bit of a mixer to follow.
Yeah. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And then last thing I'll say is there's that chart, that bar chart of the different types of organizations, arts, cultures, science, and heritage. And so you had mentioned wanting to see it kind of even out a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I also think that it's fair to say that we don't currently have as many heritage organizations, right? And so I do think that what we're seeing as well, there are some opportunities, surely. Mm-hmm. It's also very representative of the types of nonprofits that we have in the community. So I think well done on that.
It is, thank you. And they had to pick one, and lots of them are more than one. And they tended to pick arts for whatever reason, most of them. So there's also that. There's sort of more there than that chart really shows. Yeah.
Thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gilman.
Mayor Pro Tem was so eloquent that I will just add my sincere thanks to everybody involved in the review and setting the criteria. It's a huge lift and a huge gift to our community. So I'm just overjoyed that this has happened. Look forward to the vote.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council? Okay, well, I'll reserve my comments for a moment. Melissa or Dean, thank you very much for being here as well, and we appreciate your service and your commitment on the board. Thank you. So with that, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to move to approve a resolution authorizing the funding recommendation of the Cultural Access Advisory Board for Inspire Olympia contracts.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. And at this time, I would like to invite up someone we are all very familiar with, and those of us in this room certainly miss her, our former mayor, Cheryl Selby.
I always wanted to do this. Wow. All right. Whew. Such a fun experience, isn't it? To actually be in the room where it happened, and not often do we as elected leaders get to see the fruits of our labors. And so many of you were on the council in 2022 when you supported this. And I just want to give a little context for some people that might be listening and that don't know how we got here. And so I'm going to go back to 2015 and the state legislature. And our local champion, Senator Karen Fraser, led the charge to pass this legislation to create a cultural access program in the state of Washington. That was supported greatly by some of our local nonprofit leaders, including Patty Belmonte from the Hands-On Children's Museum and Jill Barnes from the Washington Center. They were instrumental in getting that legislation passed. So, it got passed, and, there was energy here in Olympia to get it on the ballot measure, but the city, like we always do, we have a lot of competing demands for what we put forward to our voters, and the timing just wasn't right. In the meantime, Tacoma put it to their voters, and it passed in 2018. And so then things started to get geared up again in 2019, and then what happened in 2020, right? So everything all the brakes came on during COVID. So as we were coming out of COVID in 2021, the group reconvened, the local group of nonprofit leaders, to say, hey, now is the time, especially how do we rebuild out of COVID? How can we leverage our amazing arts, cultures, and science and history groups to help us heal and rebuild and create community in such a great way? So I was approached, and I said, I'm happy to take the lead with council on this and see if we can get it on the ballot. And so this council was amazingly supportive. In 2022, we voted as a council to put it to the voters, and it passed overwhelmingly in April 2 years ago. And so it's just so exciting to see us get to this point. I want to acknowledge, like I said, the nonprofit leaders who not only kept graciously coming back to council, but also once we voted to put it on the ballot, took the lead on the campaign. I was privileged to be co-chair with Parfait Basselet of the campaign, but we were held up by so many of the people in this community, doing doorbelling and doing all the things you do for a campaign and fundraising. And it was amazing when it crossed the finish line. I'll never forget that night. So here we are, and you saw what 1 year of funding can do for this community, and I can't wait to see the ripple effect of these dollars going out. There's a saying, it's from a Broadway show, Hello, Dolly, that money's like manure. You need to spread it around, encouraging young things to grow. And that's what this money is. And I also want to remind council, kind of put this little pin on this conversation, that since we passed the legislation here in the city, the legislature made it councilmanic for cities to do it. So it just takes a majority of the council to keep these programs going. And every 7 years, it's going to come back to council. And I will be here, I promise you, encouraging the council at that time to keep these programs going forward, because I think you'll be able to see the impact that this will have and make us truly one of the top-notch arts, histories, science, and communities in Washington State and in the United States. So thank you again for giving me some time. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, former Mayor Selby. Don't go anywhere just yet. We'll see if we have any comments from the dais for you. Councilmember Parsley.
Just a big thank you, former Mayor Selby. You were the champion it takes a lot of work to do this, and all we did was say aye, and you did all the rest of the work, so thank you very much. And it must be amazing for you to look at that list. Look what you created with the community and community help, but you were the champion.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
This is likely going to turn into a round robin situation. We all have very many things to say. I miss you so much. But about Inspire, thank you for your leadership. And you talked about how many organizations and people really rallied to make this happen, right, and kind of bring it across the finish line. And I think what you didn't talk about is how many times you had to kind of convince people that didn't believe in it, like, hey, this is important, this is not a fluffy thing, this is not something just for fun, but this is really important, and you had to keep at it and keep at it and keep at it in order to get the council to vote in 2022, right, to that place. So that's huge. May 22nd wasn't that long ago. And so when this presentation was at the Community Livability and Public Safety Committee, and the committee found out, we sort of naturally just mentioned former Mayor Selby, but then it was confirmed that she was attending virtually, and the mood changed. I know, certainly myself, my voice went up a couple of octaves. They say that you get higher pitched when you like someone, or when so it happens with crushes and just people you have admiration for. And I remember thinking, oh, hi. But yeah, it was such a special night, and we were so joyful that evening, and it's so great to see you here in such a full circle moment, and I believe you that you will be here in 7 years, absolutely. Anyway, 5 years, excuse me. She used to correct me sometimes on council too. Anyway, thank you so much.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
I was not on the council when this passed, but I did vote for it publicly. I will say that if I am here in 5 years, I will definitely, it'll be an easy yes because of how much progress has been done in a year. It's incredible how much this is going to affect the community culturally, historically, through the arts, through just there's a myriad of ways that this could help improve the community. So thank you.
Councilmember Gilman.
I'll just add my thanks and resist the temptation to bring my voice up 2 octaves. But this was a conversation starting in 2016 on council, and then the home fund opportunity came, and the public safety measure opportunity came, and each time our mayor graciously said, okay, let's take that other measure on, but before I leave, and I appreciate that steadfast commitment over many years to seeing this through. And I think it's multiplied and echoed by all the people behind you and the rest of their crew who this past year put in hundreds of hours together to stand it up. So thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, this was one of my, it was, things were in the works when I joined council. And obviously voted and supported for it to go to a ballot and all of that. And you think you know something when you look at, you think you know the impact when you look at it in black and white on paper. And it is entirely another thing to see this presented to us in this way and to actually see the impact that it's going to do. And you alluded to that in your remarks, Cheryl, about how this is going to just impact so much in our community. And you've done that work, championing and leading that work for us as a community. It's incredible. This is just 1 year of an impact. And frankly, I see that this is diversity, equity, and inclusion in action, in my opinion. It truly, truly is. When you think about the number of people and the demographics that will be affected and impacted by this work, when you think of the different organizations that are going to be receiving assistance from us for this work, and what we're going to be able to do in terms of serving the people who are working with these entities is just incredible. So to every person who worked on Inspire Olympia, we thank you. This council thanks you for your work. We thank our community for your support. And certainly, last but not least, we thank our former mayor, Cheryl Selby, for your work to lead this effort, to identify this need in our community and do something. And that's certainly incredible. And so tonight, I want to honor you because you certainly have given this out many times before, but I would like to present you with a mayor's coin for your efforts.
Kelly, we're taking a picture of this, right?
And looking forward to seeing you in 5 years. Hopefully you won't have to work as hard that first time around. All right, well, that concludes our official business for the evening. So again, thank you to Mary Grace and Melissa for being here this evening to present to us. And it's great to see former Mayor Selby in the chambers. So have a good evening. Thank you. So that takes us to council reports, and I will begin with the mayor's report. A few things. On the 27th, I attended the annual Memorial Day ceremony in the Capitol Rotunda, where Lieutenant Governor Heck gave some wonderful remarks, which I always appreciate going to that ceremony every year. Followed by that, on May 29th, I attended the Association of Washington Cities Large City Advisory Committee, which that was my first meeting with that group, where we discussed the 2025 legislative agenda. So I shared some of our priorities that we're hoping to see on that agenda in the coming year, which includes things like the funding for the city's rights-of-way when it comes to homelessness encampments on city rights-of-way, the cap on the public safety sales tax, as well as the property tax cap, which certainly is tied to inflation, and I think some of us are familiar with that, and so that will be returning from last year's legislative agenda on this agenda as well. And then lastly, we had a really robust discussion on something I had not heard of, which is the State Bar Association has recommended caseload standards for public defense. So there is a constitutionally, there has to be an adequate level of defense. And so the State Supreme Court's Rules Committee has approved the State Bar Association's recommendations. I would be very interested in hearing about what this could possibly mean if this is adopted by the Supreme Court for the city. So, for example, how much are we spending as a city on public defense, and how much would it cost us under these recommendations, that would be very helpful information to know. And certainly when it comes time, we would obviously do what we can to go to Capitol Campus to share and express our position on that particular issue. So very much looking forward to hearing what our staff has to provide on that. And obviously, lastly, we on June 1st, as I mentioned earlier, we dedicated our Rainbow Pride Crosswalk, and it was wonderful to deliver remarks and reflect on the progress we've made as a community, and looking forward to working with you all to build on that progress. So I will start to my right, Councilmember Vanderpool.
So I do have a few items tonight, because I was gone for a minute and I was at the Congress for the New Urbanism in Cincinnati. So I'm going to go over a couple items from that kind of stuck out to me, some interesting points. There was a little bit on parks and plazas, the idea that using active spaces as kind of a center of a neighborhood, or having your park or plaza being primarily used for foot traffic, not citywide car traffic. I thought that was a very interesting concept of kind of building around that and thinking of it as the shared space that's not just for one use but multiple uses. Mm-hmm. So there was also a little bit on Connecting Communities plan, which kind of talks about, building along those long arterials, which we've kind of done that and plans for that. But what was really interesting about a lot of that was a lot of the recommendations in that are very similar recommendations that we have for our Capital Triangle sub-area. And so it's good to see that the national trends and where planning is going and the ideas are we're already starting to think about doing in our own community. I think that really shows that we're ahead of a lot of other cities on those type of things. So I also saw a little bit about, flexible streets and the idea of tactical urbanism. This is like the idea of a 4-stage process, of having a demonstration to collect public feedback, and then doing a pilot program that's community involved, and then doing an interim design, and then doing your long-term capital development, which would be at a 10-year to 15-year plan. So kind of bringing in the community and finding that flexibility and trying to think of, how can we get to those goals, but by bringing in the community in that kind of planning process for their streets and for their neighborhoods. I also had the chance to sit in a presentation about climate change policies around reparative stance for historically underserved communities. This was kind of talking about the idea of doing equity metrics around financing through reparations, sources of allocation within climate change policy. This is kind of saying, if we do not spend as little bit of funds that we get towards climate change funds towards those communities that are already behind, it will snowball a community into a situation where they're underwater, figuratively and physically, by the fact that they are not addressed. And so I think that would be a very, again, a lot of these I believe that we can think about. Anyway, go to the next part here. So another one was about tax assessment reform. Now this one was actually kind of interesting because I didn't actually know that much about a tax assessment. But so they found, Urban 3 did a study in Asheville, North Carolina, and they found that a lot of communities that had moved away from its redlining zoning found that they were using old tax assessments where historically underserved communities that were redlined were still using tax assessment codes, where certain communities were paying higher property taxes than others by the percentage, and that the assessor was just continuing down a trend without really thinking about where that information was coming from. Another thing I really stuck out to me was the need for small, first-time local developers. This means people that are builders that would like to develop housing in the communities, and that we just need, one of the needs is that a lot of communities end up having to rely upon a couple developers to really move the housing stock in a community. And so to me, as a city, we can't pay for a ton of development. We don't have the capital to do that. But I think about our zoning, I think of our building codes, I think about, I've expressed this a little with a few of you, about the pre-approved housing plans similar to our ADU pre-approved development. And so that's one of the things that I think in the next year we'd like to really work towards, is how do we get how do we get more local development? How do we get that incremental design in our streets and our improvements? Things that are low cost but create a long-term effective change through our relationship with our community. And so there's a lot in there that I sent y'all an email on. So if you have any questions, or if it's something that you think that we can try to cross over in that would be amazing. So that was my CNU trip, Congress for the New Urbanism. So the other day I walked the Cooper Point Capitol Crest property with Ola Ecosystems, and I've learned a little bit that, that they've actually ran into some barriers in their own process of potentially building a sidewalk on a very steep road or building a crossing into the property because of that they've run into issues with the city through our community planning and development, how they found that they were running into barriers where they needed to create ecological offsets to get some of that approved, and which is interesting because that means that some of that approval process to do those parts of it are being limited because we're used to requiring an environmental offset for housing and other projects, but this is an ecological process in its own. So it makes me think about what other ways can we work with Ola Ecosystems and other nonprofits to kind of help them approve their processes a little faster, because they're doing a lot of great work for their community. So in addition to that, kind of as a sidebar, in the next year, as we think about our work plan for land use and environment, I would like to think about our shoreline master plan, our sea rise plan, all these plans that we've developed over the last few years, our climate chapter, because we should be able to build housing, but in multimodal transportation systems, but also not further the erosion of our climate. And so I'm trying to think of ways we can be more ahead of these concerns that the public may have. So just a thought. I also did attend the Pride Rainbow Crossing event. One thing that did stick out to me is that we may not have the funding to continue to paint, and that there were some, we had to kind of come up with the funds to get a lot of this stuff done. I think that as we think about this, tactical urbanism and community development, we really need to find ways to make it easier for members of the community to help, repaint a crossing or help be involved in those situations. So that's about what I got.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any questions or comments for Councilmember Vanderpool? Okay, City Manager Bernie, I was just told that you may have an update on that last comment from Councilmember Vanderpool.
On the crosswalks?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've taken these crosswalks over the last year as a pilot. So we started with paint to kind of get them on the ground and test them out and learn from them, kind of from our transportation staff, watch impacts on traffic and pedestrians and get any feedback that we can get just to make sure that we've made really good, smart decisions in terms of the locations that we've chosen. long-term, our plan is to put them down in plastic versus paint. So that's going to give them a lot more durability. Paint is really tough over the long run. They just don't, it doesn't survive the seasons very well. So we will be planning in the future to go back over and put plastic in the same color schemes down, which is going to give them a lot more staying power, and going to lessen the maintenance impacts on our maintenance staffs, and then maybe not need to rely on our community members to have so much, to put so much into having to maintain those for us. So that's the plan.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilmember Gilman.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. First, I wanted to comment briefly on the Bar Association's recommendation for staffing for public defenders. I attended a thinking session with the State Office of Public Defenders and people from across the state, and it was primarily about this issue. And it was, the perspective was that the new requirements of how many credits or how much of a caseload you take on would push attorneys to have being a public defender be less than a full-time job. And that makes it more difficult for the city to recruit somebody who has to find another way to fill out their schedule. And so that was, in addition to the overall budget impact for the city, it was also, it was several cities brainstorming about, well, what might we do that's a clever way to structure these positions so that people can still have a sort of one portfolio as their full-time job and not have to piece together multiple gigs. So that, yeah, that's another consideration in that those Bar Association recommendations. The thing I wanted to report about was not quite a really super heavy committee meeting. It was the Great Olympia Bicycle Rodeo Saturday morning. Oh my, it was even better than last year. This is Child Care Action Council's Safe Kids Thurston County, Olympia Police Department, and Intercity Transit's Walk and Roll Youth Education Program coming together to both teach bicycle riding and bicycle safety, let people practice in a traffic garden. It's like a miniature neighborhood with stop signs and crosswalks. And to do a neighborhood ride, I got to ride along with the kids following an officer around the neighborhood and back. And they fit people to bicycle helmets, and they repaired bicycles and had a smoothie making bicycle where people could pedal the blender and have an interesting green drink. So it was a wonderful day. Our officers were just terrific ambassadors. And then there was a special delight, and twice firefighter crews came and stayed until the next time they were called away. And, you know, kids are ready to follow them down the street as the trucks are leaving. They're like, when are they coming back? And then, woo, here they come back. It was a great morning. So, yeah.
Any questions or comments for Councilmember Gilman? Councilmember Parsley.
Did you get a smoothie out of the bike?
They were a little bit greener than things that I drink. So.
Well, I was going to ask, I hope that the blender was put in a very safe place. I'm having a hard time envisioning it. You don't catch the sweat of the bicyclist, do you?
So just picture an exercise bike, stationary bike, but on the front of it is this big Juice-O-Matic mounted up there. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks. Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
That sounds really great. Anyone who didn't, we better get our booties there next time. Yeah. I'm imagining this smoothie maker in Olympia. I guess I'm kind of poking fun at our community a little bit, including myself. But in Olympia, we'd have a smoothie that was vegan, gluten-free, free of dairy. We'd have free of everything. I have no reports tonight. Rest assured, I continue doing my job. We got some great things baking. Looking forward to telling you about that later. Thanks.
Yes. And just want to acknowledge that you were also present at the crosswalk dedication on the 1st as well. Councilmember Parsley.
I have nothing to report.
All right. City Manager Bernie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one more kind of Pride Month update. So typically, the community is used to seeing the pride flags is usually raised at City Hall, which it is today, and will be for Pride Month. And the other thing that's new this year is the pride flag is up at every city building across the city, including fire stations, the maintenance center. That's work of our employee resource groups who asked for that work to be done. And I just want to thank everyone for making that happen and getting that up there. So just one more thing to add to the list. And then on the case standards conversation, since it came up a couple times, Rich popped over because as you know, that falls under his purview. We are tracking that, and Rich and I are going to talk about our one-on-one this week, and I'll have some more information for you. But it is significant in terms of the impact, Mr. Mayor, as you mentioned, both on the public defenders and budgetarily. There's a significant impact there, so it's something we definitely will need to pay attention to.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for the city manager? All right, seeing none with no further business before the Olympia City Council, we're adjourned.